anonymous function. In this case, we have this anonymous function that contains in its body alert hello world. So if you were to click on the HTML element that has ID blah, it would pop up a little dialog box that said hello world. And most of the other events are pretty much working the same way in that you have some sort of anonymous function that you pass into it that gets triggered on the specified event. So this one gets triggered by a mouse over, so all you have to do is move your cursor over that HTML element, and it will call this function that has alert hello world. Yeah?
Can you just explain an anonymous function?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a couple slides. Sorry. So JavaScript functions. The way JavaScript is kind of a funny language in that it's not, it's a little bit confusing in some ways. So one of the things it has is like these functions, and the typical way a function is made is you start with function, and then you have the function name, and then you have some variables in the function. So you can have like any number of variables, or sorry, any number of arguments passed into the function, or you can have 0. You asked the question earlier about anonymous functions. Anonymous functions are sort of functions that are delivered on the fly. They're entire functions that are passed into some argument, or in this case, in the case of the previous slide, it was the event handler that accepted an anonymous function. You could just as well, in the previous slide, let's just say you had written this function do something. In the previous example, instead of putting this function in there, you could put do something, and it will call that do something function. So this is just a way to sort of have functions without proper names.
And if you're not like a CSS background, just a quick general tip on what a function is. It's basically a way to run, like code that you've listed out at a later time. So, basically you wrap it within these braces, and then it just allows you to execute that code by name at a later time. So you don't have to retype it. That's basically the way I would.
And is the function just listed like that? So you would list off a bunch of functions, and then you would start it on later.
Yeah. So the name in front of the function is basically a label, and then you can refer to everything that's written within those braces later just by name.
All right. Just a show of hands, who understands functions? Can you raise your hand if you understand it? Okay. That's good to know. So you can think of JavaScript functions just like math functions, and I have a slide here. So if you go back to what you learned in algebra, you always have these functions where it's like f of x equals x squared plus x plus 3. It was really simple. You guys understand that, right? You guys remember that from algebra? I hope? Okay. So I'm assuming you understand that because no one's saying no. It's okay if you don't. We all forget math after a while if we don't use it. So the math functions, the way they work is they take in an argument, and then they do some little magic inside this black box, and then they spit out some return value, right? And you can have functions with single arguments or multiple arguments. In this case, we have x, y. It takes in 2 arguments, and it spits out an output. And you can go so on and so forth into more arguments. So JavaScript functions are just, So JavaScript functions are just working the same way that algebra functions work, in that you have some sort of f of whatever, but in this case you have variables or parameters that you pass into that function. So it's just sort of a little bit of a syntax change, but for the most part it acts just like a math function that you've seen in your algebra classes. Okay, another cool thing with jQuery is that you can sort of string along multiple actions to a selection. In this case, instead of being repetitive and selecting the div and changing the adder and selecting it again and then changing the CSS, we can select it once and then append both of these JavaScript functions to it so that we can make our code cleaner and more readable and just better style overall. very quick. Append and append to. These are kind of a little bit tricky. You have to understand the nuance. The append to, what this does, what this function above here does, first creates an HTML element, or a set of HTML elements. So you can, for example, put like a P and a span and like images or whatever together. But as long as it's all HTML, you can put it into that selector, and you can append it to whatever this class.inner is, or every element that has class.inner. So that's in contrast to append, in which case you select the element that you want to append to first, and then you tell it what HTML elements you want to append to that. So it's slightly confusing maybe, but don't get too bogged down on it.
So you're assigning HTML to it?
This is manipulation.
Just manipulating, okay.
Yeah. Oh, so one reason why you might want to do this is, okay, for example, in our lab, as you're going to see later, what you're going to have to do is, like, on the fly, be able to produce HTML based off some server request. So the server tells you that there's new information, and that you need to display this new information without having to refresh the page. What this allows you to do is create some HTML in your JavaScript, and when the server tells you that there's information, then you can sort of append that, append these new elements as the server tells you more and more. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So an example of when you would use this would be like if you have tabs or something?
So, great example. Facebook. If you go to the Facebook homepage and log into your account, and you add status, or you add your own status, what it does is it sends the information to the server, and it also generates the HTML. So that's why you're able to see your status come up immediately without having any page refreshes. So I'm going to talk about this business about not having page refreshes a little later, and that's what AJAX is about.
But yeah, this is basically for like document manipulation. So it lets you create and add HTML to your document on the fly. So what John is saying is like you get information from the server, and you want your users to be able to see that, right? Like the server gives you some status. What you do is you maybe create a paragraph or a span, and then with JavaScript you can write in the response from the server in that, and then actually add it to the DOM tree with JavaScript, and then it would show up on the page. So append is basically document manipulation, or adding HTML to your page.
All right, so there's several sort of jQuery things or categories. There's things called jQuery traversal, which you sort of, let's see, you haven't touched any of these yet, but I'm going to show you a demo a little bit. And there's something called manipulation, which you have been able to touch. You've done add class, remove class, append. Prepend is kind of just the same thing, but prepending. And your append to, and all these other ones I'm going to go over in a minute. Then we have these cool jQuery effects, which allow us to make UI that looks really nice. All right. Can someone turn off the light? Okay, so let's see if I can get this. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is jQuery traversal. And with jQuery traversal, what that allows us to do is select certain elements and not select certain elements depending on what we exactly want to do. So right here I have I have something called .add. And what .add does is it takes a selector, in this case H3. Can you guys see this? Is it too small?
Full screen.
This is like the most I can do, but let me see if I can change.
The lecture slides are online too, so we can go down with those things.
Should we preferences the tile? Setting? Oh, B.
Okay, it's alright.
Can't you use magnifying glass?
Yeah, but the problem is like I have this thing on the side, and
We like it more.
What program is that?
Oh, so
No,
this,
plus.
that's
What is
good. No, it's not.
Oh, this. Oh, it's E-Tech editor.
Yeah, it's something called eText Editor. The reason why I didn't tell you guys about this is because
Oh,
you have
sorry.
Oh, the reason why I didn't tell you guys about this program, which is only on Windows, is because it is not free. So you'd have to pay for it if you wanted a legitimate copy. Let's see. Oh yeah. Right. So the first thing we're going to do is do a .add example. So this is our HTML. It's really simple. And this is our jQuery. It looks really ugly. Yeah. So what we do is we select the HTML elements that have H3. In this case, this guy is an H3 right here. You can't really tell, but these are progressively smaller. So we select the first H3 and we do something called .add. And what that does is allow it sort of adds, we take the first selection that we get and we add to that collection of elements anything that we specify in the parameters here. So in this case, we've selected all H3s. For this page, there's only one. So that gets sent into sort of like a selection pile. And then we add an H4, and that gets thrown into the selection pile, and then we add an H5. So what it's doing is it's selecting all three of these HTML elements here. And if we click it, they should all turn red. So the way we do that is we have the .click event handler. I think Alex talked about this a little bit. We're going to talk about it a little more next lecture. So what it does is we pass it an anonymous function, and we say this. And what this refers to is the set of elements that were selected. In this case, it's H3, H4, H5. And we assign the CSS color to red. That's how all three of those guys got changed. Okay, the next thing we want to do is select something called .children. And what .children does is it takes the selection and everything that's a child of that element, we apply actions to. So in this case, we want a click function for all the children of form 1, which is this guy here. And it'll just change the background colors to yellow, and you click it. Okay? Okay. The next thing is something called the .first function. Oh, so just by the way, side note, I'm going to upload all this later, so you guys can play around with this if you want. Okay, so the next thing is .first. So earlier we had selected .children, which selected everything within the form. So in the form we have these two inputs, which are these guys here, and it selected both of those and applied this click function. Now in this case, what we wanted to do is we selected all the children, but we just wanted to select the first one. So in this case, it would select this guy, and what it does is it gives it an event handler called double click, and it changes the text color to green. So double click it, changes to green. Okay. And this is like opposite to first, so the last one, which is this in this case, should change to the color chocolate. That's actually a color. I found out there's actually a really huge list of color names that you can give in CSS.
And we're adding that into the HTML standard.
Okay. Okay, so right here we have an unordered list with list elements here and here, and each of the list elements have a span. So this guy is called parent X, and this guy is called find X. And okay, so what this guy does is it selects the parent